My brother shattered my project PC 1 week before graduation. My parents scorned my tears. What if the people who were supposed to protect you, the ones you called family, became the architects of your downfall? What if the sound of your life falling apart wasn't a dramatic scream, but the wet, electric crunch of every dream you ever had, frying right in front of you? The suffocating smell of burnt electronics and sickly sweet, cheap soda still haunts me. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day that ripped my world apart, leaving behind only the shattered fragments of what I once called family. I'm Ethan, 32 now, and I can still hear that awful sizzle crystal clear when I close my eyes. Before I tell you how I ended up buying my parents' foreclosed house at auction and literally kicking them off the lawn they used to own, let me take you back to the exact moment I realized I didn't have a family. I had hostages, and I'd been playing hostage my entire life. Growing up, I was always the practice kid. My brother, Caleb, came along 4 years after me, and from that moment on, I basically ceased to exist. Caleb was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When Caleb broke my stuff, my mom, Sarah, would just shrug and say, "Boys will be boys." When I got upset about it, I was too sensitive. When Caleb failed his classes, they'd hire tutors. But when I struggled, well, I just wasn't trying hard enough. The pattern was etched in stone. By high school, I knew my place. I worked 3 jobs just to pay for everything myself, while Caleb got whatever he wanted handed to him on a silver platter. I worked brutal overnight diner shifts, scrubbing floors until my back ached. Weekends were spent doing landscaping, hauling mulch under the blazing sun. Evenings, I tutored other kids to make extra cash. I took out student loans that I knew I'd be paying off until I was 40. Used textbooks, ramen for dinner most nights, that was my college experience. Meanwhile, Caleb was on his 3rd attempt at community college, fully funded by Sarah and my dad, David. He cycled through majors faster than most people change socks, protein shakes, day trading, crypto, drop shipping. None of it ever worked, but they just kept funding the dreams. But I made it through. I earned my bachelor's in landscape architecture. My professors actually said I had real talent, which felt incredible. I got accepted into a highly competitive master's program, one that only took 15 students a year. I saved for 3 years to build my own custom computer. I researched every single component, every tiny detail, and spent an entire weekend assembling it myself. When it finally booted up successfully, I actually teared up. This machine, it was mine. Something I had built, piece by agonizing piece, with my own hard-earned money. I poured 6 months of my life into my master's thesis. Sustainable urban park design for low-income neighborhoods, native plants, accessible pathways, green infrastructure, community spaces. I worked every single night after my jobs until dawn, meticulously crafting CAD drawings, 3D renders, technical specs, and cost analyses. The sterling competition was my golden ticket, a $15,000 prize and guaranteed interviews at top firms. My thesis advisor told me I had a real shot at first place. 1 week until my thesis defense. 1 week until graduation. 1 week until the competition submission. Everything was ready. It was 2 p.m. that Tuesday in late April. I got home from class and immediately smelled it. Burning electronics and that sickly sweet neon green soda Caleb practically lived on. My stomach dropped like a stone. I threw open my apartment door. Caleb stood in my bedroom, holding an aluminum baseball bat. My custom-built PC tower was knocked over, its glass panel shattered. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was the neon green soda dripping from the ventilation grate, pooling inside the case. I could hear it. The circuits frying, pop, crackle, sizzle. The acrid smell of burning plastic filled the room, choking me. Caleb tossed the bat onto my bed, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked satisfied. My legs went weak. Inside that hard drive was 6 months of work. My entire thesis. Hundreds of CAD drawings, 3D renders I'd perfected over countless hours. Technical specs, cost analyses, everything for the sterling competition, all of it drowning in soda. I whispered one word. Caleb shrugged. He said he'd told me he needed a ride to the mall for his date with Maya. I'd told him I was busy. Well, he sneered, now you're not busy, are you? Problem solved. He smiled, that cold, empty smile that screamed he knew he'd get away with it. I walked forward slowly, my boots crunching on the glass fragments that littered my floor. I reached out to touch the monitor. It was bent at a sickening 45-degree angle where the bat had connected. The screen was completely black, utterly dead. I pressed the power button on the tower, even though I knew it was pointless. Nothing. No lights, no fans, no startup sounds. Just silence, and the smell of burnt circuits. Everything was dead. Suddenly, Sarah's voice drifted in from my living room. Cheerful, casual, like she'd just stopped by for a friendly visit. She and David walked into my room. They had emergency keys to my apartment. I'd given them copies years ago, in case something happened. A real emergency. Apparently, Caleb needing a ride to impress some girl qualified as an emergency in their minds. Sarah looked at the destroyed computer, then at Caleb holding the bat, then at me standing there in shock. I waited for the scream. I waited for her to explode at Caleb, to demand answers, to yell, to grab him by the ear like she used to when we were kids and he'd done something wrong. Instead, she sighed. This long, exasperated sigh, as if I was the one being unreasonable. She said my name, Ethan, in that exhausted tone I'd heard my entire life. The tone that meant I was about to be the problem again. She told me not to look so tragic. It was just a toy, she said. Just a toy. 3 years of saving. 6 months of work. My entire future. Just a toy. I choked out the words, my voice raw. That machine cost $3,000. My thesis is on there. My graduation literally depends on this. The competition submission is due in 8 days and everything is on that hard drive. David squeezed into the room behind Sarah. He was a big guy, always taking up space. He looked at the destroyed computer and actually chuckles. That low, rumbling chuckle that used to make me feel safe when I was little. Now it just made my skin crawl. He said, $3,000 for a video game box. Sarah, I told you I was right all along. He wasted his money. If you'd saved for a house down payment or a college fund for your future kids instead of playing games, you wouldn't be crying right now. He called me immature. Short-sighted. I tried to stay calm, I really did. I tried to explain one more time that it wasn't for games, that I was an architect, that I drew buildings, designed public spaces. This machine was my professional tool. I needed it to do my actual job, the job I'd spent 6 years training for. Caleb grabbed a bag of barbecue chips from my shelf, ripped it open, and shoved a handful into his mouth. He crunched loudly, looking me dead in the eyes. You just draw pretty pictures, he said, crumbs flying. I'm the one with real business ideas. Real money-making plans. Then he turned to Sarah and asked if she transferred the money for his latest crypto investment. Gotta buy the dip before it's too late. Sarah's entire face transformed. It went from annoyed to adoring in half a second. Her eyes lit up. She smiled at Caleb like he'd just told her he was curing cancer. Yes, honey, she cooed. I sent the money this morning. Be careful, though. We believe in you. You're going to make it big one day. I just stared at them. All 3 of them. Standing in my destroyed room like this was totally normal. My entire livelihood was literally smoking on the desk. The hard drive that contained 6 months of sleepless work was drowning in soda because my 29-year-old brother had thrown a toddler tantrum. And they were standing there discussing his crypto portfolio as if I didn't exist. I said it clearly, enunciating every word. Caleb broke it on purpose. He poured soda on it because I wouldn't drive him around. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate destruction of property. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. Caleb told me it slipped. He was holding his soda and accidentally knocked it over. Why do you always assume the worst about your brother, Ethan? You've been jealous of him since we were kids, and it's ugly. Really ugly. It's time to grow up. Jealous? Jealous? I pointed at the wreckage with a shaking hand. This is a crime. Actual destruction of property. That bat didn't just fall from the sky. The glass didn't shatter itself. The soda didn't pour itself into the ventilation grate. Sarah's voice went sharp. Stop being so dramatic, Ethan. You're tearing this family apart over a piece of metal. Family comes first. Always, no matter what. You need to remember that. David stepped closer and put his hand on my shoulder. It felt like a clamp, heavy and controlling. We'll buy you a notebook, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. A nice paper one from the office supply store. Maybe a few pencils. Maybe you should have printed your homework out like people used to do back in his day. Working by hand builds character. Makes you appreciate things more. Caleb snorted through his mouth full of chips, spraying crumbs everywhere. Don't act like you're the only one who matters, Ethan. The world doesn't revolve around you. Maybe this is good for you. Teach you some humility. Something inside me snapped. But it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Like a cable being cut. Like power being severed from a machine. I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw Sarah clutching her purse with both hands, her eyes constantly darting to Caleb to make sure he was okay. I saw David standing there, chest puffed out, refusing to understand anything that didn't involve manual labor or sports scores. I saw Caleb smirking, eating my food in my destroyed room, secure in the knowledge that he could burn my apartment down and they'd blame me for having flammable curtains. I realized something in that moment. Something I should have realized years ago. I didn't have parents. I had Caleb's fan club, his cheerleading squad. And I was just the janitor they kept around to clean up the mess. The scapegoat they blamed when things went wrong. The rage that had been building in my chest suddenly cooled, turned to ice. I felt calm. Dangerously calm. The kind of calm that comes right before you make a life-changing decision. I said it. 2 words. Get out. The room went completely silent. Sarah looked offended. Actually offended. We drove all the way over here to visit you. We were going to bring lasagna, but we forgot it at home. But still. The thought counted. I repeated myself, my voice flat. Get out. Leave my emergency key on the counter. Get out of my apartment right now. David's face turned red. He stepped forward, invading my space. You're kicking your own mother out over a computer. After everything we've done for you over the years. After we raised you and fed you and put a roof over your head, this is how you repay us. I held his gaze, didn't blink. You hadn't done anything for me, I told him, the words tasting like ash. You paid for Caleb's car. You paid for his 3 failed attempts at college. You paid for his latest business scheme. I worked 3 jobs to pay my own tuition. I went hungry to save money. I scrubbed toilets at 2 a.m. to afford textbooks. I built this computer with money I made myself, money I earned with my own sweat and time. And now Caleb has destroyed it because I wouldn't be his personal chauffeur. I gave them a final ultimatum. You have 30 seconds to leave, or I'm calling the police. I'll press charges for vandalism, for breaking and entering since you let yourselves in without permission, for destruction of property. Caleb's smile finally faltered. His eyes went wide. "You wouldn't," he stammered. "You're bluffing." "Mom, tell him he wouldn't actually do it." Sarah looked at my face. Really looked at me. Maybe she saw something she hadn't seen before. Maybe she saw that I'd changed, that I wasn't the scared kid who'd take their abuse anymore. Maybe she saw that I'd finally had enough. She spat the word, "Fine." Her voice dripping with venom. "If you want to choose a machine over your own flesh and blood, go ahead. But don't expect us to come running when you're lonely and miserable. You're making a huge mistake, Ethan. You'll regret this." She grabbed Caleb's arm and pulled him toward the door, snatched the emergency key from her purse, and slammed it down on my kitchen counter hard enough that I heard it bounce. "Your brother's having a tantrum, Caleb," she hissed. "We're leaving." They shuffled out. David muttered something under his breath about the ungrateful generation and kids these days. Caleb shot me one last glare over his shoulder. But there was something else in his eyes, too. Fear. Real fear. Like he'd finally realized I might actually follow through. The door slammed shut. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my neighbor's TV through the wall. Could hear traffic outside my window. Could hear my own breathing. But inside my apartment, the silence pressed down like a physical weight. I sank to the floor right there in my doorway, my back against the wall, head in my hands. The smell of burnt electronics was overwhelming, made me nauseous. I wanted to scream, wanted to punch the wall, wanted to throw something. But I was too tired, too utterly devastated. 6 months of work, gone. My thesis defense was in 7 days. The competition deadline in 8. I was done. Finished. Years of work and sacrifice, all destroyed because my brother was a spoiled child in a grown man's body. Then a thought hit me. A flicker of hope in the wreckage. I scrambled to my feet, nearly slipped on the glass shards, and dropped to my knees. I crawled under the desk, shoving aside the sticky cables and destroyed components. I'd hidden something under there. A fail-safe. Insurance. A small, ruggedized USB drive, one of those heavy-duty ones meant for construction sites and outdoor work. I'd velcroed it to the underside of the desk frame, where nobody would ever see it. A backup location I'd never told anyone about. My hands shook as I felt for it. Please be there. Please be there. Plastic. Cool. Hard plastic. I ripped it off the Velcro strips and held it up to the light. The drive was dry. Completely intact. No soda damage. No physical damage. Perfect. I'd been backing up my thesis every single night before bed. An old habit from years of Caleb breaking my stuff when we were kids. I'd learned early to always have a backup of anything important, to never trust that something would be safe, even in my own room. I crawled out from under the desk, still holding the drive like it was the Holy Grail. Everything was on here. Every CAD drawing, every render, every document, every calculation. 6 months of work, all of it safe. Caleb didn't win. I started laughing. It came out manic, bordering on hysterical, echoing in my empty apartment. Caleb destroyed a $3,000 machine and thought he'd ruined my life. But he hadn't. All he'd done was show me exactly who he was, who they all were, and given me the final, necessary push to cut them out completely. The next morning, I showed up at the university computer lab when it opened at 7 a.m. I signed up for a workstation, plugged in my backup drive. Everything loaded perfectly. I spent the next 7 days working 18-hour stretches, only leaving to use the bathroom and grab vending machine food. By day 3, the lab staff knew me, brought me coffee without asking, told me to take care of myself. I refined every last detail of the thesis, tweaked the presentation boards, practiced my defense presentation until I could recite it from memory. I barely slept. When I did, it was for 2-hour power naps with my head on the desk, running entirely on coffee, spite, and the vivid image of my family standing in my destroyed room, acting like I was the problem. The thesis defense went perfectly. I mean, perfectly. My committee asked tough questions, and I had answers ready for every single one. The 3D renders drew actual gasps when I showed the seasonal variations. One professor told me it was the most thorough sustainability analysis she'd seen from a graduate student. Another said my approach to accessible design should be the standard the program teaches. The committee chair declared I'd set a new bar for the program. I graduated with honors, with distinction. I got offers from 2 landscape architecture firms before I even walked across the stage in my cap and gown. Real offers. Actual salaries and benefits and room for growth. But standing there in my graduation robe, looking out at the audience of families cheering for their kids, I noticed the empty seats where Sarah and David should have been. Where Caleb should have been. For about 3 seconds, it hurt. Then I remembered them in my room. Remembered Sarah calling my $3,000 professional tool a toy. Remembered David laughing at my pain. Remembered Caleb smirking while he destroyed 6 months of my work. The hurt turned into something else. Relief. Freedom. They weren't there because I hadn't invited them. Hadn't even told them graduation was happening. They didn't deserve to be there. I took a job at Hartwell Design Group. It was a mid-level position, a $65,000 salary, which felt like a fortune after years of scraping by. Good benefits, retirement match, actual paid time off. I started working on commercial projects, city parks, community centers, residential developments. I was good at my work. Better than good. Within 6 months, I was promoted to senior designer. Within a year, I was leading projects. Within 2 years, I was pulling in 6 figures. My boss told me I had instincts most designers took a decade to develop. That I understood how people actually use spaces instead of just making them look pretty. I won the Sterling competition on my first try. First place, $15,000 prize, and my design featured in every industry magazine. Firms I'd admired for years were suddenly reaching out, asking if I was interested in partnership tracks. I never called my parents. They never called me. Complete radio silence for 3.5 years. It was like we'd mutually agreed to erase each other. And honestly, I slept better than I had in my entire life. No more Sunday dinners where I was the punching bag. No more guilt trips about not helping Caleb enough. No more being compared to my brother and found lacking. Just peace. I dated, had relationships, and eventually met a woman named Chloe who worked in graphic design. She was smart, independent, had her own goals, and didn't need me to complete her. We got serious, moved in together after a year, adopted a rescue dog. Life was good. Better than good. Stable. Healthy. Normal. Then one night, 3.5 years after I'd kicked my family out of my apartment, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something, some intuition, made me answer. It was my grandfather, David's father. We'd been close when I was a kid. He used to take me fishing, taught me how to use a table saw in his workshop, always slipped me $20 when Sarah wasn't looking. But after the blow-up with my parents, I'd lost touch with most of the extended family. David had probably told everyone I was crazy or unstable or whatever story made him look good. Grandpa's voice sounded old on the phone. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with the time of day. He said he'd heard what happened 3 years ago. That David had given him some story about me accusing Caleb of destroying my property over nothing and cutting the family off because I was jealous. But Grandpa didn't buy it. He'd lived with David long enough to know how he operated. Plus, he remembered all the times Caleb broke my stuff when we were kids and I got blamed for being careless. He asked if we could meet for coffee. Said there was something important he needed to discuss, something about his estate and the future. We met at a diner near his place 2 days later. Grandpa looked friendlier than I remembered. Thinner, moving slower. He ordered black coffee and apple pie and got straight to the point, like he always did. He was sick. Stage 4 lung cancer. Doctors had given him 6 months tops. He'd been putting his affairs in order, updating his will, deciding what to do with his property. He owned a house up by Cedar Lake, a beautiful property he'd built himself back in the 70s. 3 acres of pine trees, a private dock, a stone fireplace, hardwood floors he'd laid by hand. The place was worth close to $1 million now with the way waterfront property values had exploded. In his original will, everything was supposed to go to David. The house, the land, everything. But Grandpa wanted to change it. He wanted the house to go to me instead. I asked why. Not because I didn't want it, but because I needed to understand. Grandpa said he'd talked to David last month. Asked him how I was doing. David told him I'd gone crazy. Made up lies about Caleb destroying my computer. Cut the whole family off because I couldn't handle that Caleb was more successful than me. Said I'd always been the problem child. Jealous. Unstable. Couldn't hold down relationships or jobs. That I'd refused to apologize and make amends even after they tried to reconcile. Grandpa didn't believe it. He'd known me since I was born. He remembered me at 7 years old teaching myself to read because I wanted to understand instruction manuals. Remembered me at 12 saving my allowance to buy Caleb a birthday present, even though Caleb had broken my skateboard the week before. Remembered me working every summer through high school instead of hanging out with friends. He knew I wasn't the problem. So he called my aunt, called a few cousins, and got the real story. How Caleb had destroyed my thesis computer right before graduation. How Sarah and David had laughed at me. How I'd kicked them out and never looked back. How I'd graduated with honors and built an actual career, while Caleb was still bouncing between get-rich-quick schemes. Grandpa looked me in the eyes, his own eyes clouded with pain, and said his son had failed as a father. That he'd raised a man who couldn't see what mattered, who'd chosen favorites and let the golden child destroy the good one. Grandpa said he wanted to make sure I had something solid, something no one could take away. He wanted the house to go to me, wanted me to have the security he'd built with his own hands. I didn't know what to say. This house represented generational wealth, stability, everything I'd been working toward, everything my parents had denied me. 3 months later, Grandpa passed away. He went peacefully in his sleep. According to the hospice nurse, the funeral was tense. David assumed the house was coming to him. He'd already looked into selling it. Told Caleb they'd split the money 60-40, use it to fund Caleb's latest business venture, some mobile app idea that would definitely make millions this time. The will reading happened the following week. I showed up in the dark gray suit I wore to client presentations. Professional. David, Sarah, and Caleb were already there, looking smug. Like they'd already won. Sarah was dressed like she was going to a party. Caleb wore a graphic t-shirt with a hole in the armpit. The lawyer was an older woman with sharp eyes and zero patience for nonsense. She read through the smaller items first. Some savings bonds split between various grandchildren. A vintage car collection that went to my uncle. Some tools and equipment for other family members. Then she got to the house. The big one. The $1 million property. She read Grandpa's exact words, the Cedar Lake property and all its contents, including the land, dock, and all structures, to go to Ethan Mitchell, my grandson, in hopes that it serves as the foundation he deserves and never received from his father. You could have heard a pin drop. David's face went from smug, to confused, to red, to purple in about 5 seconds. He stood up so fast his chair fell backward and clattered on the floor. He started yelling that the will was invalid, that Grandpa wasn't in his right mind at the end, that I'd manipulated a dying old man, poisoned him against his own son, that I'd probably lied to Grandpa about Caleb destroying my computer, that I'd always been a manipulative little liar. The lawyer didn't even blink. She said, in this calm, professional voice, that Grandpa had been evaluated by 2 separate doctors before signing the updated will. Both confirmed he was fully mentally competent, sharp as ever, and knew exactly what he was doing and why. The will was airtight, notarized, witnessed, filed properly. The house was legally mine, and there was nothing they could do about it. Caleb called me a snake, said I'd stolen his inheritance, that Grandpa had promised him that house years ago. Sarah started her crying performance, the fake kind, where no actual tears come out. How could you do this to your own family, Ethan? How could you turn Grandpa against us? She asked what kind of person I was. David threatened to contest the will in court, sue me for manipulation or undue influence or whatever he could think of. I looked him dead in the eyes and told him to go ahead and try. I reminded him that I had a lawyer now too, a good one, and that Grandpa had documented everything, including the reasons for his decision. Then I walked out. I left them sitting there with the lawyer. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look back. The house was more beautiful than I remembered from childhood visits. It needed work, yeah. The roof had some missing shingles. The deck was rotting in places. Windows were old and drafty. But the bones were solid. Grandpa had built things to last. I spent the next 8 months renovating, hired contractors for the major stuff like the roof and foundation work. I did some of the cosmetic work myself on weekends. Chloe helped me pick out paint colors and light fixtures and furniture. We stripped the old wallpaper and repainted everything in clean whites and soft grays. Refinished the hardwood floors until they gleamed. Updated the kitchen with new appliances and quartz countertops. Replaced all the windows with energy-efficient ones. Built a new deck with composite materials that wouldn't rot. The place transformed. It looked like something from a home design magazine. But here's the thing. I wasn't keeping it as a vacation home for me and Chloe. I had a different plan. A better plan. During those 8 months of renovation, my parents contacted me exactly once. A text from Sarah's number. Short and to the point. Said they needed help. Financial help. David's construction business had failed. He'd taken out a second mortgage on their house to keep it going. Then he'd taken out a third to fund Caleb's latest scheme, some subscription box service for men that was supposed to revolutionize the market. Except Caleb had never actually researched the market, or figured out logistics, or done any actual business planning. He just spent $60,000 on inventory and a website and assumed customers would magically appear. They didn't. Now Sarah and David were facing foreclosure on their house. The house they'd lived in for 30 years. The house where I grew up. They needed $80,000 to bring the mortgage current and avoid losing everything. Sarah's text said it was my duty as a son to help. That family sticks together in hard times. That this was my chance to show I was the bigger person. That surely I could spare $80,000 from my inheritance. The house was worth almost $1 million. What was $80,000? I didn't respond. I just screenshotted the text and saved it in a folder on my laptop labeled Evidence. Figured I might need documentation of their entitlement later. 2 months after that text, their house went into foreclosure. The bank seized it. They had to move out with whatever they could fit in Caleb's car and a rented U-Haul. They ended up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment across town. Caleb moved in with them because his latest girlfriend had kicked him out after he spent her rent money on more inventory for his failed business. I heard all this through my aunt, who'd stayed in touch with me after Grandpa's funeral. She felt bad for them, but also admitted they'd done it to themselves. Said David had always been terrible with money, and Caleb had always been enabled to fail. She told me Sarah and David were telling everyone who'd listen that I'd refused to help them. That I'd inherited $1 million property and couldn't spare $80,000 for my own parents. That I'd cut them off out of pure spite, playing the victim card as hard as they could. What they didn't know was that I'd bought their foreclosed house at auction. I'd set up a shell company specifically for this purpose, Miller Property Holdings, LLC. Completely legal, completely anonymous. Paid cash, below market value because it was a foreclosure and needed work. The whole transaction was done through lawyers and title companies. My parents had no idea their former house now belonged to me. I didn't tell them. I just let them live in their cramped apartment. Let them struggle with bills and blame me for their problems. Meanwhile, I kept working on Grandpa's house, kept building my career, kept living my life. Chloe and I got engaged. She understood what I was doing even before I told her the full plan. She said she was proud of me for breaking the cycle, for not letting them drag me down. Then I got a call from a non-profit organization I'd been volunteering with, the Foundation for Family Financial Abuse Survivors. It was an organization that helped young adults who'd been financially exploited by their own families. Kids who'd had college funds stolen, who'd been forced to hand over paychecks, who'd had credit cards opened in their names without permission, who'd been used as co-signers for loans they never saw, whose parents had stolen their identities. The stories were brutal, and way more common than people realized. The executive director asked if I'd be willing to help them develop a residential program. She said the biggest gap in services was housing. These kids needed somewhere safe to live while they rebuilt their lives, while they learned financial literacy and job skills and got counseling, while they repaired their credit and saved money and figured out who they were outside of family dysfunction. She said they'd been looking for a property for 2 years but couldn't find anything affordable. Everything was too expensive or too small or in bad neighborhoods. She asked if I knew anyone who might donate property or fund a purchase. I told her I might have a solution. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers. Grandpa's house officially became property of the Miller Haven Trust, a non-profit organization I'd set up specifically for this purpose. The house would provide free housing for up to 6 young adults at a time, renewable 6-month stays with extensions available, job training through partnerships with local businesses, financial literacy courses, credit repair assistance, mental health counseling, everything these kids needed to get back on their feet. The grand opening was scheduled for a Saturday in June. Beautiful weather, clear skies, perfect temperature. We'd invited local media, city council members, major donors, community leaders. It was a big deal. My picture was in the newspaper. A local TV station sent a reporter. The house looked incredible. We'd planted gardens full of native plants. Built a workshop in the old garage for teaching trades. Set up a computer lab for resume writing and job applications. Furnished every bedroom. Stocked the kitchen. Made it a real home. I was setting up chairs on the lawn that morning when a rusted sedan pulled into the driveway. My stomach dropped. I recognized that car. Had seen it in photos my aunt posted on social media. Sarah, David, and Caleb climbed out. They looked rough. David had gained probably 50 pounds. Sarah looked older, harder, with deep lines around her mouth. Caleb's clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair greasy. They walked up the driveway slowly, looking around at the renovated property with confused expressions, probably wondering what I was doing here. Sarah spotted me, and her face lit up with fake warmth. She called my name, Ethan, like we were old friends. I stood there holding a stack of programs. Chloe appeared at my side immediately. She took my hand. A united front. David spoke first. Said they'd heard I was doing something with Grandpa's house. Thought they'd stop by and see what I was up to. His voice had that forced casual tone that meant he wanted something. Probably money. I told them clearly they were trespassing. This was private property. They needed to leave. Caleb spoke up, his voice rough. This was Grandpa's house. It belonged to the family. You can't just keep us out. I corrected him. It belongs to the Miller Haven Trust. It hasn't been Grandpa's house for almost a year. And you are not family. You are the people who tried to guilt me into paying off their foreclosure after spending decades treating me like garbage. Sarah took a step forward. Her eyes were already filling with tears. I recognized the performance. Waterworks number 4. Her signature guilt trip move. She said my name in that wounded voice. Said they'd paid for their mistakes, done their probation, suffered enough. Said they were living in a tiny apartment, barely scraping by, begged me to see that they needed help. I echoed the exact words David used to say to me when I needed help. Sounds like a budgeting problem, I said flatly. Maybe you should have planned better. David puffed out his chest. He said they forgave me for everything. For sending them to jail. For humiliating them. For cutting them off. Said they realized family was more important than grudges, that they were ready to move past all this, ready to be a family again. The audacity was breathtaking. They were standing on property I owned, destitute because of their own terrible choices, offering me forgiveness. Caleb stepped forward, looked at the renovated house with greedy eyes. Since you have a big place in the city, and this house is so big, he began, maybe we could stay here. Just temporarily, to get back on our feet. He said he could help maintain the property. Sarah could cook and clean. They'd earn their keep. Sarah nodded eagerly. It would be perfect. We'd be the caretakers, handymen, housekeepers. You wouldn't have to hire strangers. Family looking after family. I looked at all 3 of them. Really looked at them. They hadn't changed. Not one single bit. They still saw me as a resource to be used, a bank to be robbed, a safety net they could fall into whenever they screwed up. They genuinely believed that enough time had passed, that I'd forget everything, that I'd let them back in. I asked calmly if they wanted to live here. David said it would help them so much. Called me son for the first time in years. Said it would help me heal, too. That having family around would be good for both of us. I said I understood their position. Then I turned and pointed to the sign I'd installed by the front gate that morning. It was covered with a blue tarp, ready for the official unveiling ceremony in a few hours. I told Caleb to go ahead and pull the tarp down. He looked confused but walked over and yanked the rope. The tarp fell away. The sign was beautiful. Professionally made from polished oak with gold engraved lettering. It read, "The Miller Haven, a sanctuary for survivors of family financial abuse and exploitation." Below that, in smaller letters, providing housing, education, and support for young adults rebuilding their lives. All 3 of them stared at it. Caleb's mouth hung open. Sarah actually gasped. David's face went scarlet. David demanded to know what this was. I explained calmly that it wasn't a vacation home. That, as of yesterday, this property belonged to a non-profit trust. That I donated it specifically for this purpose. I walked closer to them. I told them that starting next month, this house would host 6 young adults who'd been kicked out, exploited, or robbed by their own families. Kids who'd had their college funds stolen. Who'd been forced to co-sign loans. Who'd had their credit destroyed. Who'd been used and abused and thrown away. This would be a place where they could live rent-free while learning trades and rebuilding their credit. A place where they'd be safe from people exactly like my parents. Sarah's face went completely pale. You gave it away. Grandpa's $1 million house, to strangers. To people we don't even know. I said they weren't strangers. They are my real family now. Because family isn't about blood or biology. Family is about the people who have your back, who support you, who believe in you, who don't destroy your life's work because they're bored. I told her she wasn't my family. You're just the woman who gave birth to me. That's it. Biology. Nothing more. Caleb lost it. He started yelling that I was insane, that I'd given away $1 million just to spite them, that I was a vindictive psychopath who cared more about strangers than his own blood. I stayed completely calm. I didn't do this to spite you, I told him, my voice steady. I did it so the next kid who has his thesis computer smashed by a jealous sibling, or his college fund stolen by selfish parents, or his credit ruined by people who were supposed to protect him, has somewhere safe to go. I built the safety net they stole from me. I became the parent to these kids that my parents never were to me. The silence was complete. Birds were singing in the trees. Water was lapping against the dock. Cars drove by on the road. But in our little circle, the air felt dead. I pointed toward the road. Get off my property before I call the police. And this time, I won't ask for a plea deal. This time, I'll make sure you face every possible charge. They didn't scream. Didn't argue. They just deflated. Like someone had let all the air out. The reality finally hit them. There was no inheritance coming. No golden child rescue. No safety net provided by the son they'd abused for 30 years. David looked at the house one last time. A house that should have been his. A house he'd lost because of his own failures. A house that was now a fortress, protecting people from men exactly like him. He spat on the ground, weak and pathetic. Then turned and shuffled back to the rusted car. Sarah looked at me for a long moment. I thought she might finally apologize. Finally acknowledge what they'd done. Instead, she whispered that I was a cruel man, that I'd regret this, that God would judge me for abandoning my family. I told her I was counting on it, that I'd gladly explain my choices to God. Caleb said nothing, just stared at me with pure hatred, the look of a parasite finally realizing the host has immunity. They got in the car. The engine sputtered and coughed before catching. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. They backed out of the driveway, tires crunching on gravel. I watched until the car disappeared completely. Chloe squeezed my hand, asked if I was okay. I took a deep breath, checked my pulse. Steady. Hands weren't shaking. No fear, no guilt, no second thoughts. I told her I was free. Actually free for the first time in my life. This journey taught me that true family isn't found in blood, but in loyalty, respect, and mutual support. It taught me that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is cut ties with the people who consistently hurt you. If you've ever had to make a tough choice like this, or found family in unexpected places, I want to hear your story. Let me know in the comments below, and please, consider subscribing if you want to hear more stories about finding strength and freedom.